Hey, Tommy from the Run Testers with another running shoe versus. In this video, we are going to be looking at the New Balance 1080 V14 and the Saucony Triumph 22. Let's have a look at what we all thought. The New Balance 1080 V14 costs £160 or $164.99. It weighs 287 grams or 10.1 ounces for men in a size 8 and the drop is 6mm. The Saucony Triumph 22 costs £170 or $160. It weighs 306 grams or 10.8 ounces for men in a size 8 and the drop is 10mm. The New Balance 1080 V14 is a daily shoe built for comfort and accessibility. In the previous version of the shoe, New Balance modified the Fresh Foam X midsole to be noticeably softer, but with that came a dip in the stability and the versatility of the shoe. The 1080 V14 addresses that with a slightly firmer version of the foam and the overall midsole geometry. In addition, there's an updated engineered mesh upper to improve the fit and provide better breathability. That also includes a good level of padding as well as a soft, gusseted tongue. On the outsole is a modest layer of rubber across the key areas of the shoe, although this doesn't cover the full length of the midsole foam. The Saucony Triumph 22 sees some major updates to the line. The biggest of those is a new PWRRUN PB foam midsole, a PEBA-based material replacing the PWRRUN Plus found in the Triumph 21, that aims to improve cushioning, energy return and responsiveness. The same foam is used in the Saucony Endorphin Pro 4 and Speed 4. There's also an updated upper that's designed to be even plusher and more comfortable than its predecessor, and a noticeably wider base across the full length of the shoe to improve stability. On the outsole, there's a generous layer of rubber to provide grip and protect the midsole foam.
I ran in my regular UK running size, which is an 8.5. That is a 9 in New Balance in the US. First thing when I first put them on is they do feel quite snug. This is a close fitting shoe. I find all New Balance shoes nowadays can be a little bit problematic on sizing. I have to work quite hard to make sure I get the right size. But having run these in, overall, I think there's just about enough room. There's a decent sort of bit of room at the end of the toe box. There's a nice kind of amount of wiggle room across the top here, and the flexible uppers really help with that. The only point I really find, they do hold snug into the kind of toe knuckles and across the top of this midfoot, partly because of this big padded tongue that really sort of holds there. Back into the heel collars, everything is super padded, super plush. I get good heel hold, good stability back there. Flipping over to the Saucony Triumph 22, it's not a dissimilar story, to be honest. There's a bit more room up the end of the toes, you can see. So there's, this is basically the same UK 8.5, but a USA 9.5. So slightly different if you're buying in the US, but overall nice airy fit across the toes. Again, the flexible uppers, there's a bit more structure to them, so there's not quite as much kind of knitted wiggle room that you get here, but there is still plenty of wiggle room, plenty airy there with the space around the toes. When you come back into the toe knuckles, this is where there's just a bit more give and a bit more room compared to the New Balance 1080 V14 in my kind of true to size. The back of the shoe is very similar to the New Balance. Padded tongue that just takes the lace pinch off, covers all the way down under the laces. You've got these big padded heel collars. They're probably marginally more padded than the New Balance 1018. They still hold really nicely, keep everything locked in place. I'd recommend going true to size in the Saucony Triumph 22. I think with the New Balance 1080 V14, if you like it really roomy, you might want to consider looking at the wide fit in that shoe. But I think I can get away with going true to size just with a slightly more snug fit.
When it comes to fit of the two shoes, I've got my normal UK size in both, which is a UK 9. With Saucony, that's a US 10. With New Balance, it's a US 9.5. Both of them fit me really well in that size. The normal size I have for both of these brands, I think obviously the New Balance is maybe a little bit more dialed in because it is a smaller shoe in the US, but I actually had enough room in both shoes, but not too much room. Good hold around the heel and midfoot. So I would say stick to your normal running shoe size for both of these brands. Saucony is generally very consistent across its range, it's fair to say. New Balance can be a bit more up and down with its sizing, but the 1080 fit me really well. And it's the same size I've used across all previous models of the shoe as well.
So in terms of fit, it's been very good for me overall in both of these shoes. No major issues to report. I would say these are true to size fitting shoes. I've had them both in a UK size 8 and that's been absolutely fine for me. What I would say is obviously these are kind of very well kind of padded shoes. I think with the Triumph 22 is a little bit more liberal with that padding throughout the shoe. I would say the Triumph 22 has a little bit more volume as well overall. There's a bit more room in that kind of toe box as well. So if that's something that you want, then I think the Triumph 22 is going to get you that. Now, that does not to say that the 1080 V14 is snug by any stretch of the imagination. It's good room there in that toe box as well too. The midfoot holds are very similar. The kind of lacing and tongue combos are very similar as well. A lot of padding in that tongue. It's the same story for the heel collars. So for me, I think if you want the kind of slightly roomier, more spacious kind of cushion shoe, then it would be the Triumph 22 to go for. But ultimately, going true to size, you shouldn't have any problem on either of these shoes.
Okay, so I have a size 8 in both of these shoes. I found them to be very comfortable shoes to wear. There's plenty of space in the forefoot of these shoes. They're both shoes designed for comfort, really. There's plenty of space for my big toe and around the front side of the Triumph 22. Same goes for the 1080 V14. There's plenty of padding. There's more padding in the Triumph 22. In fact, it feels like a very plush shoe to wear, but there's still plenty in the 1080 V14. Overall, I would definitely say stay to your size in both of these shoes. I've had no issues at all in these. Found to be very comfortable and well fitted with nice comfortable uppers as well.
So the New Balance 1080 and the Saucony Triumph are both very long-running and popular cushion daily trainer lines. They've both undergone, I think, a pretty big change this year, I would say. And if you were asking me about these two shoes last year, I'd have picked the Triumph 21 over the 1080 V13 myself. But I think the updates made this year have definitely skewed me in favour of the 1080 V14, which is one of my favourite cushion shoes all round this year, whereas the Triumph 22 is one that I haven't got on with all that well. So with the Triumph 22, Saucony obviously completely revamped this midsole, putting in PWRRUN PB, a very exciting change on paper, bringing that PEBA-based foam to this cushion shoe, a big slab of it, big wide base to make sure it's still stable, sidewalls of foam and all that, and you thought you should have a nice, lively but stable and cushioned ride. But while it is protective and cushioned for sure, it's actually not a very lively shoe at all. You get a little bit of a roll through from the rocker, but I found it just quite a bit dull and lifeless running at easy paces, and I found it way too heavy and big to pick up the pacing as well. So I don't think it scores that highly on either versatility or the fun of the ride with this shoe. I mean, it still is certainly a comfortable and protective shoe, and that's its primary job, is to hoover up a lot of miles and protect the legs, but it doesn't do it in a very engaging or fun way. And although it is protective, I don't think it's especially soft. Like, it is quite soft at the heel for sure, but I don't think it's as soft as the New Balance 1080 V14. The previous model of this shoe, the 1080 V13, was really soft, and it was too soft for me. It was very squishy. I found that I was almost wading through the foam, and it kind of sapped the energy out of me, even at easy paces on long runs. Like, for short, easy runs, it was okay. It was really soft and fun, but it was a shoe that I didn't really get into sync with and enjoy ticking over long miles in. It was just a bit too present on my foot. I think New Balance have just basically made the foam a little bit more resilient with the 1080 V14, and that's made a huge difference for me in terms of my enjoyment of the shoe on the run. It's still certainly a very soft shoe, and softer than the Triumph in my opinion, but I think now I get a much more natural transition from heel to toe. I get a little bit more ping off that foam in the forefoot, and the shoe just feels a bit more lively and fun while still having that really soft and protective element to it as well. I wouldn't say the 1080 is a particularly fast shoe, but I think it is a more versatile shoe than the Triumph 22 if you are looking for one of these to use as a daily trainer to cover a lot of different runs, which is helped by the fact it's a bit lighter and just feels a fair bit nimbler on the foot because it has got a much smaller design that isn't quite so wide. And maybe the Triumph is a bit more stable as a result of that, but I didn't have any stability problems myself with the 1080 V14, even with a fairly soft foam underfoot. Did a short run in both shoes at the same time, and yeah, the difference is really quite stark on the run for me. Like, the 1080 really feels a lot more nimble, soft, fun, like just turns over a bit more easily, whereas the Triumph just feels like a really big shoe to me, a heavy shoe, and it has that rocker, it works okay, but you just don't get a lot from the foam. You don't get a really nice soft feel. Like I say, it is definitely a protective shoe. It's going to do the job and like protecting the legs on easy miles, and it is cushioned, but it doesn't feel very soft, and it doesn't feel like a very fun shoe to pull on. So it feels a lot denser underfoot than the 1080, which just feels a bit more lively and fun while still being nice and soft, and just disappears on the foot a bit more. Like, if I'm going out for an easy run, I just feel like I can tick over in the 1080 and not really think about it too much, whereas the Triumph, it's a little bit intrusive in how large it is.
So in terms of my running time in these two shoes, I would say first and foremost, these aren't necessarily my favourite versions of these respective lines. I think there have been changes here from the previous versions of these shoes. I think have these changes necessarily made them better shoes? I'm not necessarily convinced, but I think in terms of ticking those key boxes of max cushion shoes, they really prioritise comfort and protection. They do that very well. These are going to be shoes that you will use for easy runs, recovery runs, longer runs where you are not running at your hardest or fastest, and you just want something to tick that mileage off, and you just want those kind of training miles in the bank. These are going to be shoes that are going to do that. They definitely do it in slightly different ways. I think the first way, I would say, or the thing that's kind of really stood out for me has been the weight of these shoes. Now, obviously, these are max cushion shoes. They're not going to be super light shoes, But I would say the Triumph 22 has felt like the bigger shoe to me. I talked about the level of padding or more noticeable padding in this shoe, and it just feels like a lot more shoe when I've been running in the Triumph 22 compared to the 1080-14, where I think the distribution of the weight feels a lot more balanced in this shoe ultimately, and I think that really has a big say in the experience of running in these shoes. The other aspect here obviously is the midsole, and it's not just about the midsole sensation, what it feels like, it's, you know, the formation of it, you know, what's surrounding it to kind of deliver that kind of ride as well too. And the Triumph 22 getting PWRRUN PB, a big stack of it. Obviously we loved it in the Endorphin line, you know, it's a big stack at the heel, and then you get down, it kind of narrows obviously in the forefoot, which kind of generally that's what we expect to see. You're getting a similar stack of this kind of fresh foam X foam in the 1080-V14. What I would say is that it doesn't narrow as much, and I think it's a bit more consistent in terms of that spread of that foam. Now, I think what that does ultimately, it creates something that is, you know, using that foam to create a quite stable feel. You know, this is a very stable shoe as well too, and I think the outsole contributes to that. But ultimately, that's, I think, what that foam kind of does in one aspect. I think the Triumph 22, the PWRRUN PB, while, you know, we've loved it in the Power kind of Endorphin line, I think, you know, for me, it doesn't feel as, you know, bouncy as I would expect it to be. I didn't find it as plush either. It kind of falls in between something of that, and I think ultimately it just feels a bit laborious to run in the shoe. Even at kind of easy and recovery paces, I just felt like a bit of an effort to roll in the shoe, and I didn't feel like it was helping me in any way to really get through that time where maybe I didn't want to be out running. I think for me, the 1080-V14, you know, I really like the 1080-V13. This midsole is not as soft and plush, but it still has a plusher element to it, a little bit more resilient, I would say. And I think what that does is it makes it more comfortable, I think, and more protective over longer distances. I do still think that it's a easy run shoe, a recovery run shoe. I think it can handle moderate paces as well, particularly compared to the Triumph 22. And I think the key thing for me is not just the midsole, it's also the rocker. The rocker is just a bit more prominent. It's not overly aggressive, but it's enough to kind of roll you through from heel to toe and just kind of really get you through those kind of those running miles, or those, particularly those longer ones as well. Whereas I feel like that kind of lacked, or was lacking for me in the Triumph 22. I think from an outsole point of view, not a huge amount in it. I think there's a bit more rubber and coverage on the Triumph 22 outsole compared to the 1080-V14. These are going to be shoes ultimately you're going to spend a lot of time in. I think from a traction and grip point of view, pavements and roads, absolutely fine. I think kind of lighter trails are absolutely going to be fine there as well too. I just think maybe you're getting a little bit more rubber on the Triumph 22, but it's not a huge amount in it. So ultimately these are max cushion shoes. I think, as I said, tick those key boxes. In terms of the one that I would go for, I'll get into that next.
Okay, so two shoes that are designed for a similar purpose. They're both daily shoes that veer more towards that cushioned, comfortable side of running. They are shoes that have had a few developments from the previous versions of both of these shoes, some not necessarily welcome ones. Let's start with the 1080-V14. So 1080-V14, big fan of this shoe. The 1080-V13, I was really keen on that shoe because 1080-V12, V11 wasn't really keen on those. Found them to be a very boring design of shoe. The midsole just didn't really do a lot for me. It just felt a little bit dead. It was quite well balanced, so it was quite accessible for a lot of people because it wasn't too soft, and also relatively stable for those sorts of shoes. And then the 1080-V13 came along, and the new midsole foam was really soft. So it suddenly polarized the audience quite a bit, because some people didn't really want it to go that soft, and if you're a really heavy runner or you don't really like running in soft shoes, 1080-V13 was a little bit of a Marmite shoe. For me, I really like soft shoes, so I very much enjoyed it, but it had limitations in that shoe. You couldn't really run a long distance in it because it'd sap a lot of your energy because it was really soft. It's great for recovery runs and easy runs just because it deadened the impact, just felt very soft, nestled your feet into the ground. But a lot of people didn't like that shoe because of that. The 1080-V14 has rectified that a bit. One of the other problems with the 1080-V13 is because of that softer midsole, it lacked a little bit of stability, which the previous versions had. 1080-V14 fixes that by making it a bit more stable through the design of the midsole and the midsole itself, the foam in there. And as a result, it is a nice balance between the V12 and the V13. It's not as soft as the V13, but it's definitely softer than the V12. And as a result, it's a great daily shoe. It's really solid for easy runs, recovery runs, great for longer distance efforts, anything like that where you're running at a nice comfortable pace. very, very good. And it's probably it's definitely a bit more versatile than 1080 V13, just because it's got a bit more of a responsive midsole in it. All in all, really solid daily shoe. No problems at all with this. I've been using this for about 70k so far. I've been doing a lot of marathon training sessions in it. The sort of 1 hour run at my comfortable pace, which would be like 5-minute kilometers. Great. Tick in the box. Really enjoyed it. Nothing amazing about it. It's not like I could finish a run in this shoe and think that was a phenomenal experience, nice and bouncy. It's not like the Mizuno Neo Vista or something. Good solid shoe, and definitely a very accessible shoe because you're getting a nice balanced midsole. Now the Saucony Triumph 22, the Saucony Triumph 21 and the 20, I was a massive fan of both of those shoes. They were like my perfect running shoe. They were quite soft, a little bit of energy return in them, very enjoyable to run in, very comfortable, but also you could pick up the pace nicely in them as well. They were like the perfect holiday shoe that you could take away with you because you could just do loads of easy runs in it. But if you really wanted to go and do intervals or something, you could do a bit of them in that shoe. So it was a great daily shoe that really ticked a lot of boxes, and I was a big fan of the 21. 22, there's a few changes to this shoe which I really just don't get along with. The midsole foam, it just feels a lot thicker to me and a lot denser, and I don't get a lot of cushioning out of it. I'm 69 kilograms, so I'm not getting the best out of this midsole foam probably. I think if you're heavier, you're probably going to get a little bit more compression out of this. But the way the shoe's designed, I'm a mid-foot striker, and I hit the shoe right in the middle, and I just don't get anything out of it. It's like I hit the ground and it just stops, and then I lift my foot up and go again, and I don't really get any rolling action from it. I don't really get any cushioning from it. It doesn't sort of compress when I'm running in it. It just feels very clunky to me as a shoe. And I used this shoe actually because I ran Boston Marathon and London Marathon 6 days after. I ran Boston in Alphafly 3s, but because I was doing London as a sort of comfortable run at my easy run pace, I decided to use the Triumph 22 because I was such a big fan of 21. I thought I'll give it a go and it would see how it is over the marathon. Didn't enjoy running London Marathon in this shoe. It just felt like a lot of hard work for me. I didn't feel like it was comfortable, didn't feel like it was rolling me forward at all. It just felt like a bit of a slog. It would have felt like a slog anyway because I'd just done a marathon the week before, but it just didn't seem to help me at all, this shoe. Since then, I've done a lot of other runs in it, and it just doesn't work for me, this shoe. It just feels like it's lost the magic that I got from the previous Triumph 21. For easy runs, for recovery runs, I think it's fine. But even for those, I want a bit more softness in it. And I know some people will say there's a lot of softness. I think Nick notices it a bit more, softness in that heel of the shoe, because he's a heel striker. I don't hit it on the heel. I hit it in that mid section, and I'm getting nothing. So yeah, not really warm to this shoe at all. I very rarely pick it up for any sorts of runs unless I'm testing it for some reason. The other thing I would say about these two shoes is the outsole is very, very good on the Triumph 22. Really solid rubber outsole, great level of grip in it, very similar to something like Puma grip. So that's a really good plus point for the Triumph 22. And also it's a very stable shoe as well. Should have mentioned that earlier when I was not talking about grip. The outsole on the 1080 V14, absolutely fine, what you'd expect from the 1080 range. It does have some exposed sections, but I have not seen any wear or tear on any of this at the bottom. But I would say the grip is much better on the Triumph 22, just the way it's designed and the coverage that you get on that shoe.
Now, I've probably run slightly less miles in both of these shoes than the other testers, as they came in a bit later for me, but I've managed to rack up around 40 kilometres in both, and I've put them through a good range of paces, though in most cases I've ended up dropping back to a very easy pace, because that's really, I think, where these shoes run best. For me, there's an upper pace limit on both. Essentially what you've got are two soft cushioned, pretty pillowy shoes that work best for the easiest miles. They're best at that end of running paces. Now, I like the previous generations of both shoes for what they offered. The 1080 V13 was a good, highly cushioned, slow recovery run shoe with a soft ride, but not much by way of versatility for me. And the 1080 V14 offers more of the same, though it's back to having a slightly stiffer, more immediate feel underfoot. It's still highly cushioned, but I would say it's not quite as soft. That brings a bit more immediacy to the ride, which I'm a big fan of. Now, when it comes to the Triumph 22, there's much more marked difference, I think, between this and the old generation, and I don't think Saucony has improved things. It now feels much softer to me, more squidgy, a bit more laboured, it's a bit heavier on the foot. So some of the sprightliness, I think, that gave the Triumph 21 a bit more versatility and range, well, that's kind of gone. To me, it now feels much more like an easy run shoe only. The Triumph 21 had a bit more about it, than the 1080 V13, but now the Triumph 22 goes much more directly head-to-head, I think, with the 1080 V14. I'm not in love with the 22. There's sort of too much work to get through the touchdown to toe off. I much prefer the Ride 17 from Saucony, even for my easier runs. But both shoes offer good stability. Both shoes look like they'll endure well and last long miles. I've also did a side-by-side mile in these two shoes to really tease out those finer detailed differences. So I've just done my side-by-side mile. I've got the Saucony Triumph 22 on the left foot. I've got the New Balance 1080 V14 on the right foot. From doing a side-by-side like that, in my head, from the run that I've just done, these shoes are very, 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 very similar. They are almost the same shoe in many, many respects. You've got the kind of same plush padded heel collars, kind of thick padded tongues, got the same kind of uppers. They're quite thick, bordering on the probably too hot if you go into kind of summer months, but there's nice and flexible, lots of room in the toe box, there's lots of wiggle room. They feel soft, they feel kind of roomy, nice and snug, nice and comfortable. All of that kind of plush comfort that you want from an easy day shoe is here in both of these shoes, from the fit and the uppers. So when it comes to the ride, I think the nuances here essentially boil down to the fact that the New Balance 1080 V14 come in slightly stiffer, they're not firmer, but it's a stiffness to that kind of midsole, and it creates a little bit of a smoother transition than I get from the Triumph 22, which is just a bit softer. I think it's a little bit squishier. I don't quite get quite as much kind of consistent roll through or consistent movement on sort of through that transition. There's a slight disconnect that I feel is a little bit of sinking in the middle, a bit more than you'll get with the New Balance 1080 V14. That said, I'm really splitting hairs here, and I would happily run in either of these two shoes for the same kinds of runs, and that is essentially your easy, recovery, steady. They are both the same weight in terms of the way they feel on the foot. I think they both offer pretty much the same when it comes to that cushioning and road protection. Well, if anything, maybe the New Balance 1080 V14 feel a bit more immediate, whereas the Saucony Triumph 22 feel just mildly more bouncy, if you want to call it that. I don't find them particularly bouncy. I don't really get as much energy as I would like, even though they've got that same foam that you'll find in the Speed. I don't find that much energy in them. I find them a little bit soggy and a bit sinky overall. Yeah, so having done the side-by-side, really the upshot of it is I didn't really learn very much from it, because they do, to me, on the foot feel like they run very, very similar. If that's the thing, I think you could choose between these two shoes. You wouldn't be disappointed with either of them for going on kind of easy, sort of very easy runs. The only downside, I think, is that the Triumph 22 has lost a bit of versatility over what it had from the Triumph 21.
So my takeaway with you should go for the Saucony Triumph 22 or the New Balance 1080 V14. Now, as I said, these aren't my favourite versions of this shoe, but I think if I had to pick one, I'd be going for the New Balance shoe. I think ultimately my time in this shoe has just been a lot more memorable than my time in the Triumph 22, which I think has just slightly missed the mark for me this year, especially when I've kind of really liked the previous Triumph shoes. I think if you are looking for the shoe that, ultimately is very comfortable, offers a very kind of stable, kind of smooth, kind of gently rocketed ride that's going to really kind of nudge you forward, and, really help you tick those running miles off, then I think, the New Balance shoe does it in a lot more effective way, and it's a slightly more versatile shoe as well too. It's a little bit cheaper than the Triumph 22. It's about £10 difference in the UK. So I think for me, from a kind of price point of view and in terms of performance, I'd be going for the 1080 V14. I think for me, the Triumph 22 is just not being the Triumph that I've wanted it to be, even with that PWRRUN PB in there. So yeah, for me, it's a no-brainer. Go for the New Balance shoe, which just feels a lot more balanced in terms of a max cushion shoe and how it delivers that.
Okay, so my verdict on these two shoes, pretty easy. I mean, I'm not a massive fan of either of these shoes. I like the 1080 V14. I think it's a solid shoe. It's definitely not one of the shoes that I'm picking up very often for a lot of my training sessions or anything like that. But in testing this shoe, absolutely fine. Absolutely enjoyed it. Because I like softness, I like a bit of bounce, I'm going more likely to pick up things like the Mizuno Neo Vista, the New Balance Balos, stuff like that for a lot of the training that I'm doing. Whereas this just doesn't do things like those shoes does. It's not giving you bounce or energy return or anything like that. It's just a solid shoe, and I think that's what a lot of people need. It's accessible, it's stable, it's comfortable, it's got a balanced midsole. It probably works for lots of different weights of people, things like that. Great shoe, definitely the sort of shoe that a brand needs, because when people come in, especially when new runners and stuff, it's a very reliable option for people to buy. Triumph 22, equally, it's quite a solid shoe for that level of runner, but I do think the midsole's just not quite right in this shoe. It doesn't really feel as comfortable as the 1080 V14. It might just be largely my style of running because I'm a mid-foot runner, but a lot of people are mid-foot runners, so they're probably going to have a similar issue with it. So it just doesn't do a lot for me, and even on easy runs or recovery runs, I'm not enjoying it. So there's no run that I really find this shoe works really well for, and I think it's just the geometry of the shoe which doesn't work for me. So very easy decision for me out of these two shoes. I'm going to go for the 1080 V14 just because it's a great all-round shoe and you can't really go wrong with it.
Verdict then, and if you're looking for pillowy, soft, guaranteed cushion comfort for easy miles, both of these shoes definitely offer that, and I honestly think that you could choose either and get roughly the same experience. For me, these two will cover the same kind of runs. Neither shoe really gets out of second gear for me. They perform well in first or second gear though, but I find that limits their versatility, and I'm kind of split on which one I like the most. I prefer the fit of the Saucony Triumph 22. I marginally prefer the slightly stiffer ride of the New Balance 1080 V14. It's just a shade smoother in the transition for me. But because I find the rides so similar, I think if I had to choose one, it'd probably come down to price. And the New Balance 1080 V14 probably just about edges it. Though I honestly think that you could take either of these shoes and get largely the same experience from it.
So verdict is a very easy one for me. These are both cushion shoes that you're going to use for daily runs, easy runs. I just think the 1080 V14 is a lot more enjoyable for any of those kind of runs. I think it feels a little bit softer to me, which is nice when you are on tired legs, but it has got a nice level of resiliency, so you can kind of roll through nicely and get a bit of pop off the forefoot. And it's also just lighter, nimbler, just feels better on the foot to me than the Triumph 22 because, like I say, I just kind of forget about it when it's there. It doesn't feel like a very intrusive shoe, whereas the Triumph is this big block at the end of your foot, and it's doing the job there. It's got dense foam, it's going to last forever, it's going to protect the legs, but it doesn't really bring a lot of life to the run, whereas the 1080 is quite a fun shoe to run in, I'd think. Maybe if you're a heavier runner than me, the Triumph 22 might just have a little bit more to it. You might get a bit more bounce back from the foam because you're putting a bit more force into it or something like that, but all round I would certainly recommend the 1080 over the Triumph myself. It's just a shoe I've enjoyed more for really any kind of run.
That's it from us on this Versus. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, click that little bell, and if you're going to catch them below, you can find a link to our podcast, which comes out a couple of times each month. Thanks a lot for watching. Catch you next time.